Life Nutrition Radio and podcast streaming live on KUHSdenver.com. And we're going to have a super fun show today. Today we've got on Dr. Shay, who, if you know anything about me, you know how much I love genetics and epigenetics and the power that it gives us in our life. But Dr. Shay, Dr. Sam, does it matter to you?
It's Dr. Sam, for the formal introduction, Dr. Sam Shay, DC, IFMCP, so people know him as DC, and then it's Dr. Sam.
Okay, great. Perfect.
I'll want to stick more about that. So.
Gotcha. Anyway, super excited to have Dr. Sam on because he takes anything that I know to a whole different level, which is amazing because I love surrounding myself with people who are just amazingly smart, and that is certainly Dr. Sam. So excited to have you on here and nerd out with you. This is going to be a really great show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I love live radio. I used to have a radio show back when I lived abroad, and it was so much fun to have it live.
It's cool. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's fun too because it gives people the ability to watch it live at any point, but also, you know, we put it up, it's going to be on the podcast sites, and that makes it easy too. So we're sort of all over the place, sending out all the good information, so it's a ton of fun. But anyway, okay, so let's do this. Oh, before I forget, I started to talk about it and then forgot to do it, but we always start the show with gratitude. Gratitude can change the world. I think it's super important for us to remember that, and, you know, if possible, go to bed in gratitude and wake up in gratitude and think about it throughout the day, because I think it really changes our attitude, changes our experience in life, can change our epigenome, and I think it's super important. So, Dr. Sam, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for technology for us to have this conversation and broadcast it worldwide, or local, or wherever part of the world.
Worldwide, it's all over.
Because right now we live in such an amazing era of interconnectedness. If I had access to radio shows like this back 40 years ago, so many of my health problems could have been averted or would have been diminished. It would just been a totally different world.
Yeah.
So. Being able to now give back information that changed my life and hopefully help someone else.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it, that our experiences are what make us who we are, and sometimes they're just really freaking hard, right? And I know we'll talk a little bit about, or as much as you want, about your past experience. I think stories are, you know, a big part of this show, and, you know, what brings people on this show, but it's amazing because life can be hard, but everybody I brought on this show today, so we've had this show now for 6 years. Everybody's been an entrepreneur. Everybody has a story that's a really hard story that has brought them to this place of giving and of love and of service, and that's what I love is you know, I started the show with the word was truth, right? And so I want to bring goodness and truth and love to people and give them, just what you said, give them the ability to find answers, or at least start to move them down the line of finding answers when maybe, you know, so many people are just really struggling. And so, yeah. And we are in this interconnectedness, and some of us still feel so disconnected, which is kind of a scary, interesting dichotomy. And
what's happening is that we're having a dissolving of communities and replacing with networks.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. You have a lot of breakdown of local analog social fabric, but a massive expansion, and almost like the fabric is shredding and more disperses out as we become more interconnected digitally through networks. And so we have this paradox of having more and more communication, but feeling more and more lonely at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, so what am I grateful for today? I think I have to be grateful that we're sitting in Colorado on mid-March, and it's going to be like 80 degrees today. And I know a lot of people are really worried about that because we haven't had a lot of rain or snow, and it's a little bit early for this kind of weather, but I'm a sun girl through and through, and I'm just super grateful to be able to go out and be warm, have the windows and the doors open, and just take it all in. It just makes me really, really happy. So that's what I'm grateful for today. And dig into what you're doing to serve people.
Sure. So my history follows a very similar arc, but the details differ. So the similar arc you alluded to with prior entrepreneurs who worked it on the radio show. Most people become entrepreneurs because they want to solve a problem that really plagued them earlier in their life, and they want to make sure other people don't suffer through that same problem, either to the same degree or to the same length or to the same love it. They just want to stop. They want to resuffering, just straight up.
Yeah.
And so my arc followed the same kind of wounded healer. I mean, it's such a cliche that it's actually a constellation up in the stars, so the Chiron and Good. And mine
I don't
started
think I knew that.
So Chiron, the sunflower, in Greek myths, he literally died so that he could free another person from their suffering. There's only two people. My father was a classicist. There's only two people in Greek mythology that are unambiguously beloved and that really don't have any moral complexity to them in a negative way. It's Chiron, the wise teacher, the healer, the instructor, and Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. And that's it. That's basically it. All the other ones are a bunch of pyromaniacs on top of that one. My arc as a wounded healer started when I was 6 years old. It's with a confluence of things, tragedies. One was a really horrific divorce between my parents. I called it a nuclear divorce, and me and my siblings were caught in a blast radius. And then it combined it with a lot of violence in school that just was unending for years and years, and none of my quote friends, the students, the faculty, the staff, and certainly the kids would intervene, or my parents. And it was just allowed, and seemingly, and I was gaslit at home, and I was assaulted at school, and it led to, and then the food my parents in the 80s fed me was just terrible. It was basically high gluten. I can't believe it's not butter, which is this hydrogenated death. Lots of orange juice, which is just pure sugar. All the candy and so on. In fact, I'm writing. I'm also a stand-up comic on the side, and I use stand-up comedy as part of my advocacy and education work. I did my first comedy show, which is, people want to look it up, it's available for free online. It's called Neurospicy, Love, Life, and Comedy on the Spectrum. It turns out I have Asperger's syndrome. So I did a full 1 hour show.
It's worth it. Look it up. It's so good. Yeah.
Thank you. It's clean observational comedy. That's designed to bring people together. And I'm working on my second show right now, and it's on what it was like to grow up in the 80s, and describing the 80s through the lens of my childhood breakfast, where the best way to summarize the 80s, it was equal parts nostalgic and sinister. What we were sold as wholesome and fun is actually deeply shady and has unspoken dark reality to it. And through the lens of my breakfast and other 80s, kitschy stuff, it's very clear that was not a nostalgic time, and there's meaningful formative consequences. And to the point where the zeitgeist of the West is processing the trauma of the 80s in real time through the show Stranger Things. Like it's literally 40 years ago was when these kids growing up, and now 40 years later we're all watching Stranger Things, which is literally about like this super sharp, shady, dark, evil underbelly of the 80s. Like this is where art imitates life. Like I believe that it's so popular is because all of us who grew up in the 80s and were formed by it, we're processing this trauma in real time collectively.
That is fascinating. I watched the first season of it. I just didn't dig that deeply into it. but that's really it. I look at it at a totally different perspective, because I know it's what.
Now, anyway.
All you have to do, but if you just want the short version, just put into AI or Google, like, please explain how Stranger Things touches on all the themes and complexities and paradoxes of the 80s.
Okay.
They don't just use charts of like this compared to this compared to this. So too, quite literally.
Yep.
And I developed severe insomnia, chronic pain from all the injuries. I never had a growth spurt from the severe insomnia. I grow mostly at night, and I was insomniac from 6 to 18. And then digestive problems, sugar addiction, video game addiction, and just becoming more and more pale and frail, and which then begot more malevolent targeting by the assailants and bullies at school. So I just made a decision in high school that I am not, the tools that are being offered to me by my psychiatrist parents, both of them were psychiatrists,
Wow.
was either stop complaining or we're going to medicate you. We're going to medicate you with the submission, and we're going to continue this theme of benign parental neglect, which is just what was done in the 80s and just been continued on. And I just said, okay, it's up to me now. So I took a very sharp turn into natural medicine. I was supposed to be a third-generation medical doctor in my family. My father's father was a famous medical doctor as well. And I just went into natural medicine, and that led me to going to chiropractic school, going very heavily into nutrition and functional neurology, then later on into functional medicine, even got an acupuncture degree when I lived abroad, and then got really into functional genetics. And the intent behind all of that was I was so unwell across so many categories that I needed to cross-train across all these different disciplines to figure out what was going on in my life. And naturally, I was working with people who were also kind of kicked to the curb diagnostically by both the Western and natural medicine communities. So basically over the past several decades, I've been synthesizing all of these different fields. And what I've come to is that the most important thing that anyone can do to get the highest value for the longest period of time as a personal blueprint for their health and well-being and longevity is to do functional genetics, is to do genetics testing that looks at, first off, all the realities of your diet, and then what are the genetic realities around your relationships to the major drivers of all disease. We're not chasing genes of disease. We're not looking for the cancer gene, the heart disease gene, the Alzheimer's gene, the diabetes gene, or the stroke gene. We're looking at the drivers of all diseases that, if they're provoked long enough and strong enough, then they will go downstream and poke on those core diseases. So those drivers are your relationship to inflammation, your relationship to free radical damage, scavenging, the mitochondria, liver detox, how well you use vitamin D, methylation, cardiovascular circulation, fat metabolism. Those are the 7 major drivers of disease. So I'm not looking at an inflammation gene. I'm looking at the most important 15, 16 inflammation genes that control the other dozens and hundreds of genes underneath it that directly and indirectly affect genes. I'm looking at the inflammation. I'm looking at what are the most important genes in the most important categories, and then picking only the genes that actually you can do something about through lifestyle, diet, nutrition, or love. And that's what I've come to as if I had this test when I was 6 years old, my life would have been completely different. Utterly, completely, totally different. And I feel like if everyone had the opportunity to just get that genetic blueprint down, then the value over time is higher than any test out there without even a close second, because your genetic results are there for life. Look, I love these other tests, stool testing, hormone testing, mitochondria, they're great, but you have to redo them over time because the results are only as good for 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever. Genetics is good for life. So that's, if I wanted to, what's the lead domino? The lead domino would be a functional genetics test.
And so, because of that, you have created a company that's based on.
I'm a distributor, so I'm the distributor for fish genes in the U.S.
Okay.
But I'm the international teacher for the whole company.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Very cool. And so, did you play a role in putting this together, or just sort of?
I got involved in genetics back in 2016. So we're in our 10th, 11th year right now. Back then, I had I had energy, mood, and digestive issues cycling on a daily basis. I had really bad joint pain in my fingers, like an 80-year-old man, and I'm in my mid-30s. I didn't know what was going on. And then I ran my genetics, and I realized that one, I'm a hyperinflamer, and the inflammation, my risk for, like, there's 16 major inflammatory genes. I had 14 out of 16 of them have bad versions of them. And I know I'm oversimplified for those people who know genetics, like, quote, bad version versus yellow dots, red dots, but for sake of conversation.
Yeah.
I'm a hyperinflamer, and in my case, the inflammation will go into my joints, my skin, my mood, and my sleep. For other people, inflammation goes into retaining water, so they become swelled with water weight because the inflammatory chemicals are damaging to cells, so your body retains water to dilute those chemicals from hitting and damaging your cells. This is why people, there's some people that just, the more they exercise, the fatter they get. I've actually given a genetic conference on that, lecture at a conference on that. Actually, exercise-induced obesity, where there's a specific combo of genes where they exercise too much, they become pro-inflammatory, and then they swell with water weight. It has nothing to do with calories. It's their weight is water weight from the inflammation. And so they need to, like, reduce their exercise, increase their recovery. It's a whole separate protocol.
Yeah.
And exercise more and eat less. And so I found out that I was a hyperinflamer, and then I changed things according to what was indicated in my genes, and within a month, 2, 3, I can't remember, it's been a while, all my joint pain went away and it's still gone. And on top of that, when I did the dietary section of it, I was eating at the time I was eating a perfect Mediterranean diet, because that's what all the science said, because that's what the bell curve biochemistry says. But funny thing about bell curves, other people live at the other end of those bell curves. That's literally what defines a bell curve. And I happen to be genetically suited not for a Mediterranean diet, but for a very low carb, paleo, borderline keto diet. And within 1 week, this I do remember clearly the timeline, 1 week, my digestive, mood, and energy are leveled out. Because I was eating beyond my carb capacity. And right now, you can genetically test your relationship to carbs. Are you keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb? Additionally, I found out genetically that I was exquisitely sensitive to caffeine. And I would have what's called caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. Now, I don't care how bulletproof you make that thing. That stuff, so much coconut oil in it, make any biohacker proud. It didn't matter, because I had the genes that make caffeine really hard for me to break down. So I was an anxious, jittery mess, gaslighting myself, saying, oh, look at all this energy. No, it's this anxiety, and then I have a crash and need more caffeine and create this horrible cycle. Other things I found out about my diet, like being histamine sensitive and the high reactions to food intolerances, and the gene for sugar craving, and the gene for not feeling full from satiety genes. Long story short, I was able to identify solidly what were my dietary boundaries, what was my dietary reality, and then what was my inflammatory and drivers of all disease reality. And then I now had a roadmap to change going forward. I love this so much, and the logic of the company was more impressive than any other genetics company I ever looked at, because they actually prioritized the genes and picked very specific, narrow band of them that were valuable, as opposed to more the better. More genes is not better. Higher prioritized genes that are actionable and organized is better. And I've never seen a genetics company do that. So I got heavily involved to the point where I was editing reports, I was lecturing at conferences, I was teaching, and then I designed 2 brand new reports that are now released. In fact, they were completely wholesale replacing the carb tolerance test with my report, because it's such a massive upgrade. Now everyone's getting that.
Okay.
I've now generated 2 completely novel reports that actually summarize all the other major reports into one usable, beautiful, practical, prioritized document. So what it does for the public is like, oh, this is the genetic preferences for my diet, which is genetic preferences for my exercise, the genetic preferences for supplements. And then for the practitioner, it can reduce interpretation time down from hours
Yeah.
to like
Yeah.
a fraction of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fraction.
I started out years ago using, I think, as far as I know, it was one of the first ones that came out at the time because I was new to it, but it was methyl genetic nutrition analysis.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is, and so it's research based, which I didn't know at the time, but I think everything was so research based. But it will give you, it's giving you reports on hundreds of SNPs, and it gives you, the enzymes and the genes, and then the SNPs, and then it gives,
I'm overwhelmed even hearing this.
I know,
Like,
I know.
Even describing it, I'm feeling dizzy.
So I learned from it, and I didn't know any differently at the time, and I actually still have it because I'll refer back to it periodically. But it's amazing because they'll sit there, they have in there, okay, these are all researched, or these are less researched, these are more researched, but it is for the researcher. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's so much and so overwhelming. And I've moved away from that, when I'm working with my clients at this point. But there's so much, and people can get so overwhelmed, especially if it's not your world, and having something that is so specific and that you can take and use day to day, that can truly make a difference without being overwhelming and confusing, is really key to all that we're doing. And we, one of my favorite things, when I'm working with clients, is using the genetics and then bringing in, which I know you do too, but bringing in the goals and the lifestyle, but any labs that have been done, and just you sort of start to layer in the information, and people are like, this is, it's a game changer for people.
Yeah, my
Take, what I say to people, other biggies, is like genetics is amazing, and I think the first step. It is certainly not the last step that people want to optimize further and want to have complex things they're dealing with. It's the foundation.
Yes.
And never ever ever assume that genetics alone is sufficient. It's required, but it's not sufficient if you're especially dealing with a complex thing. In fact, I came up with a term that's in the report. It's the very back of the report. It's called metabolic barbed wire.
No.
That's the term I came up with. Metabolic barbed wire. So what metabolic barbed wire is that how many people you come across that have said, I've tried every diet from vegan to carnivore and none of it works long term? You've heard this. How many times? Okay, I figured out why. This is it. So metabolic barbed wire is where you have a conflict between your genetic preferences and your current metabolic state. For example, if someone is genetically a higher carb diet, but they have an existing candida infection, the carbs are preferred genetically but counterproductive metabolically.
Yeah.
Also true on the other end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
if I am like me, a very low carb borderline keto diet genetically, but if I have a problem with my gallbladder, or I have a problem with my pancreatic lipase, or a problem with my carnitine shuttle, or a problem with my mitochondria not being able to process fat,
Yeah.
I now have metabolic barbed wire where I prefer higher fat genetically, but I can't digest it, absorb it, transport it, or burn it, or some combination. And now I have a conflict.
Yeah.
So no matter what I do, there's a problem. So what do?
first, if you find out what your
Genetic ideal is. That's step one. And the way people typically find out they have metabolic barbed wire is that they do their genetics and they do the recommendations over a series of months, and then they hit a plateau. It's like, what's going on here? And then it's like, okay, that's a signal of probably metabolic barbed wire. Go back to your practitioner and get the other functional tests to figure out what is blocking. Like, you got to figure out, oh, this thing that I keep banging the barbed wire. You may need to switch off temporarily the genetics-based protocols to go deal with the candida or the gut issues or whatever, and then once you defang that, then you return back to the genetics. So this explains why people can do well on a diet, then crash, and then they go back to the old one, and suddenly they do better, and then they crash, and it just keeps yo-yoing back and forth and back and forth And the answer is you got to know what is the barbed wire wrapping your genetics, what your genetics are, and then you figure out the protocol to deal with the barbed wire. Then you can return back to your genetics. But most people figure out they've got barbed wire by doing the genetics first, and then they improve and they hit a plateau. Then you can stair step over there.
Yeah.
The genetics was never wrong or bad. It's
Right.
just they've just been wrapped in barbed wire. So that concept visually and just totally explain my experience, number one, but also just this grand mystery of people eventually they get labeled as hypochondriacs or attention seekers or whatever it is, and it's like, no, maybe you just generally have metabolic barbed wire and your metabolism is now in conflict with your genetic ideal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the most frustrating things that I hear in practice so often is people coming in going, they're telling me nothing's wrong with me, but I feel like ass, right? And so it really is,
Is that the medical term?
yes, it is.
Okay. Three-letter acronym probably. Associated symptom suffering syndrome or something like that.
I mean, I'll take it. Yeah, that's really good. Quick on your feet, that's why you're a comedian. Yeah. So let's do this real quick. Let's talk about people.
Oh, wait, let me touch on that real quick.
Yeah.
So when people say like, oh, they run the lab test and I'm fine. Let me just point out there's a philosophical difference between medical normals and functional optimists.
Yes.
A huge difference. Remember that bell curve I mentioned before? Okay, so in Western medicine, philosophically, it was born of triage. It was born out of World War I in order to determine who is dying, who is about or lose a function of an eye, a limb, or some other sense, and then who can be just maintained on the side because there's more urgent things present. So Western medicine was born out of the symptom is the problem, crisis management. And Western medicine philosophically is ideally suited for bringing people from crisis to stability.
Functional medicine.
Is not ideal for crisis to stability. No, philosophically, functional medicine is helping people go from chronic to normal, normal to optimal. They're different tools, different philosophies, and the problem is mission creep into either sides of the sandbox. That's the conflict. The tools are necessary for different situations. The problem is when you cross-contaminate the tools into the wrong situation. So when someone goes to a Western practitioner and they get a series of like blood tests, and the person's lived experience is like, I feel terrible in some indescript or specific way, and then there's
Some bevy of
tests of
varying degrees of
complexity and depth and variety there. And then they're told, well, your numbers are fine. There's nothing wrong with you. What, from a Western lens, from their training, if they're just looking for what's in the bell curve, what's within the medical normal, they're actually telling the truth from their lens because it's outside that bell curve that now it's pathological, it's a crisis, you need to intervene.
Right.
Now, if your range is from 2.5, out of a scale of 0 to 100, your range is from 2.5 to 97.5, and that's your range. I mean, imagine trying to fit someone in a shoe size. Like, oh, as long as your shoe is within that range of 2.5 to 97.5, then you're quote fine. Now, for those of you who are familiar with statistics, you would have caught I picked the number 2.5 to 97.5 very specifically, because that is the normal range of the bell curve. It's the bottom 2.5% is considered outside the bell curve, and the upper 2.5%, from 97.5 and above, is considered outside the bell curve on the other end. So the normal bell curve is 2.5 to 97.5. So from a Western standpoint, anything within that range is considered, air quotes, normal. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not that there's nothing wrong with you, but there's nothing explicitly pathological that we can identify based on the data we ran. That's what that actually means. From a functional medicine standpoint, you can
still have
air quotes medical normal numbers, which you can have be outside the functional optimal. Typically, the functional optimal is not between like 2.5 and 97.5. It's between like 37.5 and 62.5. This is much narrower quintile. Like you're up way closer to the top, and then there's this dead zone. You know that the gray space, the disconnect between functional optimal and medical normal, where people have this kind of miasmic, chronic ick
Yeah.
that they're being they're kind of wandering around being gaslit, you know, and sometimes with the best of
Oh, yeah.
intentions, like there's nothing
Yeah,
wrong
yeah.
with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and the Western practitioner may genuinely mean that based on the data as they understand it. So it's a philosophical difference. And you also see this in the genetics community as well. You have basically 4 types of genetics tests. You have the, you know, around St. Patrick's Day, you have the, what percentage Irish are you? That's genealogy. That's not what I'm talking about. You have then the second test of who's your daddy. That's paternity testing.
Yeah,
That's not what I'm talking about. Then you have the genetic pathology testing. And this is like you have trisomy 21. You have like these other hardwired genetic diseases that are really, really like patent and obvious and there and hardwired. But then you've got the 4th type of testing called functional genetics, which is what I do and I've been talking about. And you see it's the same philosophical difference. You go to Western geneticists, they're like, well, you don't have the gene for this disease, so stop complaining. Whereas you do a functional genetics, it's like, oh, you've got 14 out of the 16 genes for inflammation have variations on them. You're hyper-inflammatory, which means that all risk of all chronic diseases are likely very much increased because you're just generally more pro-inflammatory. What are the lifestyle, diet, nutrition, exercise, and recovery changes you can use
To calm down.
those 14 out of 16 genes as a whole, so you are just less inflammatory as such. Therefore, all of the downstream, air quotes, disease genes are way less likely to be triggered. As example, all my debilitating joint pain in my fingers completely went away.
Yeah.
So we have this philosophical difference, just in a microcosm, in the genetics world as well, not just in blood tests out there in the web.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. I love that you explain that so well. When it comes to the functional test or the functional ranges, I always tend to say more red flags come up, right? So we have more data, more red flags come up if we're looking at functional ranges as opposed to your sort of your 2.5 versus your 9.
So ranges from between 30 to 100, 20 to 100, and the optimal range, according to functional medicine, is between 60 and 80. So you tell someone who has a 31, oh, their vitamin D is normal, and in my world, like, you are halfway there.
Right.
You're halfway. You're halfway there. That the 31 is halfway, not stop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Same with like thyroid, right? I mean, you know, when we're looking just at like at TSH, and I have someone who came to me, she's struggling, and she's at 3.5. She's like, the doctor said normal. Like, she still has issues at 3.5. You know. So,
I like to replace the word normal with usual.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Usual. So for people listening, I mean, the ranges that I use in the functional medicine world is that for anyone under 65, TSH is 0.5 to 2.0. Over 65, you go up to 2.5. And to me, that's the functional optimal, 0.5 to 2, under 65. And then you also have other ranges for like 2T3 and 2T4 and all. Those are normal ranges, the same thing with the antibodies. But the thyroid is probably the best example of this of just how wildly different the lens is between medical normals and, I mean, I just use my jargon there, medical usuals and functional optimals.
Right. Yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree. I want to jump into.
Out of curiosity, what are your ranges on the TSH? I said 0.5 to 2. Do you, what's your range?
I think I've gone up to 2.5, but it's become, as I've grown in my practice, it's gone a little lower and a little lower. I think when I first started practicing, I think that the range was up to 3. But I no longer see it that way. You know,
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Carbohydrates. I think we've got 2. Well, I think everybody's so confused about the macros no matter what. But carbohydrates is one of those that is really frustrating for people. Do carbohydrates? Do you not do carbohydrates? What are carbohydrates? You know, is it just sugar and bread, or is it vegetable and fruit? Right. And so people get really. I have one in particular I'm thinking about right now who is deathly afraid of carbohydrates. because at one point she lost some weight, but now everything is super skewed on her. It's been years that she's been hardcore avoiding carbohydrates. And she's like, something's going on, and I don't know what's wrong with me, and I don't know what's happening. So I want to dig in with your knowledge as well as the testing that you're doing. Let's talk about carbohydrates and how people are different and how we know what the individual needs based on genetics.
Sure. So,
Carbohydrates are,
pun intended, complex.
and I want to just get some definitions out there. So we're talking about carbohydrates as a general term. The technical term is actually starch, but I think just for sake of argument, we're going to talk about 4 categories of carbs: high carbs, low no carbs, and then resistant carbs. So the high carbs are basically are calorie-dense foods that are made up of polysaccharides and carbohydrates that can be broken down into calories for the human system. So grains, sweet fleshy fruits, tubers like potatoes, high carbs. Then there are lower carbs, things like nuts and beans that have some carbs in them. Lower carb fruits like berries, and then a Granny Smith apple is not in the same category as a Gala apple. Like, it's different. It's just way less sugar, much more fiber. So then the third category of no carbs are things like fiber, like green vegetables, like cucumber. Not a lot of calorie carbs, but fiber, mostly water. Celery technically has carbs because of it's just the structure of the plant is technically a carb, but we call it fiber. So you got high calories, low calories, fiber, and then resistant carbs, resistant starch. So that's calories for your gut microbiome, not calories for you. Calories for the gut microbiome. Now there are some calories, like barley and chickpeas. There are some calories that go to you as well, but these are the 4 broad categories: high calorie, lower calorie, fiber, resistant starch, resistant calories for your gut biome. Is that those categories track in your experience?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now the question is, okay, how much, and how do we know? So there's a new type of genetics test that does not look at the variation or the version of the gene. Like there's 3 versions of the gene: green, yellow, and red, which correspond to 2 air quotes good copies, 1 good copy from mom and dad, a yellow dot, which is air quotes 1 good copy, 1 bad copy from either mom or dad, and then air quotes red dot, which is for quote 2 bad copies, one bad copy from each parent. That's the type of gene. But there's a different type of genetics test that we're looking at that specifically
Guides.
how many carbs you should be having. And that's looking at the number of duplicates of a specific gene called the
One gene, and for amylase.
Amylase is the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates in the first step of digestion. Amylase is made
Is sent out into the saliva.
So if you miss this step, then you have all sorts of indigestion problems because you need to break down carbs starting from the saliva. And if you don't have enough of this enzyme, or you have too many carbs to overwhelm the amount of enzymes you have, or you just rush through your eating and you're such a sympathetic dominance, you don't even make enough saliva to even send out the amylase, or you're dehydrated, or other things, like you're not going to break down carbs properly, leading to indigestion, fatigue, and mood swings, which were the exact 3 things that I had in 2016 when I was eating this quote perfect Mediterranean diet. And perfect, I mean, I knew the names. It was all organic, local. I knew the names of my farmers and their chickens. Like it was a perfect diet. The quinoa was grown by left-handed monks that delivered them by newly hatched monarch butterflies, and they were sung to. They flew away. It was a perfect diet, and I was still a mess. So what happens is that when you genetically test for the number of copies of this gene, the best way to think about it is that your digestive system is a fort. The carbs charging the fort are Vikings. The number of copies of this gene are the number of cannons that line the fort. The more cannons you have, the more you can mow down these Vikings. The version of the gene, the green, yellow, red dot, that's the version of the cannon, not the number of cannons. It's the version of it.
Yeah.
The AMY1 gene is unique because the difference between the green, yellow, and red version is trivial. The version actually doesn't really matter. It's the number of cannons you have. I'd rather have 10 red cannons than 1 green cannon.
Yeah.
So the more cannons you have, the more carbs you can mow down. So genetically, people who are like Mediterranean, they're like about a 6, 7 or so. When I ran my genetics, I had a grand total copy number of 2. The second lowest you can have. You can have up to 20.
Okay.
Now, when you look at what that means is that I have very little capacity to break down carbohydrates. So the lower your copy number, the fewer carbs you can actually tolerate. So once you know your number, between 1 and 20, now you have a guide on are you high carb, Mediterranean, paleo, or even keto. And high carb people exist, just like keto people exist. I've only seen
At most,
10 ones in my entire career in the past 10, 11 years.
Wow.
They're rare. Lots of 2s,
Yeah.
but almost
Okay.
no 1s.
Okay.
And when you look at the population distribution of these copy numbers, of these duplicates of these genes, like what cultures have higher and lower numbers? Well, the first major clinic that did this was in Australia, and they got statistically significant numbers of, there's a lot of Pacific Islanders, Maori, and Aborigine that live there, and what populations have the highest rate of diabetes? Inuit, Native American, Aborigine, Pacific Islander, Maori. And guess who have the lowest copy numbers of this gene?
Yeah.
These populations. Now, and because there was a genetic bottleneck where there was just like no agriculture, it's just not there. So there's no incentive to create duplicates to cope with the additional amount of carbs. Now, why would I have such a low number? Well, my ancestry comes from northern Russia. Not a lot grows there. Same thing. Same thing. So then you have other cultures like in China. This stuff was done a lot in China. Their average copy number is an 8. You have a multi-thousand-year rice culture. Europe is like 6, borderline 7, mostly 6. You have lots of agriculture. Western Africa, high numbers, like agriculture there. So you have logical explanations as to why you have different numbers of this gene that make amyloid. And some people say, well, why don't you just have a bunch of it anyway and enjoy all the carbs? Well, the body's conservative. You don't want to make excess enzymes and use resources to
make enzymes you're never going to
use. So, of course, you will trim down to what's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you're wasting nutrition and valuable resources to be allocated to other things. So now we can genetically test for this and determine if you're keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb. Now, I grew up in the 80s. I probably should need a copy number of 37, not 20, with the amount of carbs that I was just drowning in.
Yeah.
And it was so damaging. It was so damaging to me. And I would have done anything to have this test 40 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because like I said earlier, there's so much confusion on which way to go, and having the knowledge on something like this and the ability to
Manage these chronic situations.
is so good. I want to talk now. I've got my little list of all my little questions here. I'm digging in because
You know, one of the things that I
think that
where do I want to go with this? I think actually let's do this.
let's go to fat.
Let's talk about
Fat as far as, again, people are, well, in the 80s, right? Low fat, high carb. Fat's bad. Fat causes cardiovascular disease. So what are you seeing when you're guiding people with
whether it's the amount of fat or
the types of fat, which I probably not a great question
anyway, because nobody does well.
with the trans fats and the things that we grew up with in the 80s. But what are you seeing for people who might be lower fat or higher fat types of genes?
Genetics.
Okay, so are you asking
me about like how do people navigate weight loss or how they navigate
Yeah.
cardiovascular disease?
Yeah, let's go with the weight loss.
Okay.
Yeah.
So genetically, I observed three major categories of stubborn weight gain that are genetically based.
people that have one or some
Combination. And then if people are struggling with weight, it would be
very, very useful
to get your genetics run to see which of the
three or in combination you may be struggling with. And by far the
three types are inflammatory water weight, the second type is hormonal toxic weight, and the third type is caloric fat weight. And by far, the thing that I see the most common is the inflammatory water weight. By far. And when, so what does that mean? Is that when you are hyper-inflammatory and you eat foods that are inflammatory, then you put on water weight, not caloric weight. And go back to mention this earlier. There's about inflammatory water weight gain. The inflammatory chemicals damage cells and tissues, and so the body will retain water to dilute the inflammatory chemicals, so they hit the cells less frequently, and it buys the liver and kidney time to flush out the inflammatory chemicals. Now, I will give two examples of how people can unscientifically but anecdotally see if they're hyperinflamed.
I came up with this.
Something called the muffin test. Not muffin top, the muffin test. The muffin test is the following. You eat half of a generic store-bought muffin, and you gain between 1 and 4 pounds within a 24-hour period. Now, unless that muffin was last year's re-gifted Christmas fruitcake, it did not weigh 1 to 4 pounds.
Right.
So why did you gain so much?
Weight from half a muffin, because the sugars, the chemicals, the preservatives, the sprinkles, the colorings, the whatever leaches through the little plastic wrappy-doo, all is massively pro-inflammatory. You put this inflammatory dose through your intestinal system, which created inflammation through the entire intestinal system, which then spread inflammation through the whole body, and then your whole body's now retaining water to dilute the inflammatory chemicals to buy yourself time so your liver and kidneys can clear it out. That's the muffin test.
That's great.
A way you can know, I'll talk about my father as an example. I took
Years to convince him to stop having
high gluten toast and cheese and other foods that were overtly pro-inflammatory, and he agreed to one day and one day only where he would have chicken, coconut oil, broccoli, and coffee and nothing else. And I watched him. That's all he ate for the day. He weighed himself in the morning and the next morning, and he hates exercise, so he didn't exercise. So in one day, on this one diet, he lost, according to him, 4 pounds.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, he didn't exercise at all. He certainly had calories, but what was it? It was all water weight being dropped, and suddenly his body had a chance to go, okay, we get rid of the inflammation now.
Yeah.
So that's inflammatory water weight. Now, genetically, people can be very pro-inflammatory. Then there's some other specific genes that also wind up the inflammatory response. Like if people are sensitive to histamine.
histamine is an adjacent
Branch of the inflammatory pathway. The best way to think about histamine, people, I'm high histamine. Like they get stung by a bee and they swell up. Okay. The beads these things in your arm swell up. The bee did not inject a half quart of water into your arm to make it swell up. That's not a thing. What happened is that the bee injected venom, concentrated venom, and then the body pulled the histamine switch, which is the body's flood switch. We got to drown the area in water, very much like swelling up our whole body with water for inflammatory, but on the local level, it's histamine that's the local level as an emergency to drown the venom in water, to stop the venom from corroding and eroding nerve, muscle, bone. Well, sorry, only like certain snakes can erode bone, but you get the point. Like venom, snakes, spiders, centipede, bee sting, wasp, snake, whatever. Your body uses histamine to flood the area with water. So, if someone is hyper-reactive to histamine genetically, that means that if they eat high histamine foods, it's the equivalent of consuming a slow-moving, full-body bee sting, creating water swelling from the inside out. So you're basically creating a global histamine response, which is like a global inflammation response, retaining water. Exercise won't do a thing for that type of water, for that type of weight gain. You're living an anti-histamine
diet.
Other people can have high water weight if they have variations on their vitamin D receptor genes. Vitamin D receptor genes are the genes not to make some vitamin D from sunlight, but to get the vitamin D that got into the blood, whether from sunlight, food, or supplements, getting it from the blood into the cells, not into the blood. Into the blood is half the journey. Getting it from the blood into the cells is the important bit. That's the VDR gene. VDR is basically docking sites that grab vitamin D. If you don't have enough vitamin D receptors, you can't get the vitamin D into the cells. And vitamin D, yeah, sure, it does bone density, hooray. But the most important things that it does is control inflammation in the immune system. That's the most important thing. Vitamin D controls between 3 to 5% of your entire genome. It is probably the most consequential nutrient on the body, second only to like water.
Well, and everybody's low.
I'd say most people are.
Yeah, that was a general statement. But yes, so many people are crazy low. And then they're told they're normal because they're at 30. Anyway, I didn't rest to you earlier. But anyway, go ahead.
So in the comedy world, we call that a callback. So great. That's good job. That's a callback.
Okay, cool. How about, yes, go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to touch on the other two weights real quick. So with inflammatory water weight, this also happens when people, if they're hyper-inflammatory and they over-exercise, then they become hyper-inflamed. You see this a lot. I'm sorry, CrossFitters. You see this a lot in the CrossFit community where people and I've done genetics lectures on this at conferences on this very subject. There's a specific pattern. And you can walk in any CrossFit gym and know who's a hyper-inflamer, who's there all the time, because they may be strong, but they don't have definition. They've got this like layer of water weight on their body, and they don't, like, you can't see their defined muscles. It's because they're so inflamed, they're retaining water. And these are the same people that if they take a week off through injury or travel or the gym's closed or wherever, then they come back a week later looking better, feeling better, and they're stronger because their body had a chance to deflame. So the solution for these people is that they can still exercise, but they can't do the intense stuff every day. It's like 2 to 3 times a week with at least a day gap in between, and they can still go to their communities and just do movement, not exercise. Like do something else that's not trying to get a personal PR every 5 minutes. And people just need to know their genetic reality. Like people have a genetic reality, and I'm a fan of reality. I'd like to know what that is. So if you're a hyper-inflamer, you should know that, and you can also know what your exercise type is, like what fiber type you are. You fit for more performance in sprinting or it's a mixture or endurance, whatever. Then you have the other type of fat, which is toxic hormonal fat. And these are people who have trouble with their liver detox pathways. So fat cells act as the dirty closets of the body. So if you can't detox, it will shove all the toxins it can into fat cells. And so if you're trying to lose weight, and you feel like you're running up against this layer, this hormonal toxic list, because the body's like, you don't want to open that closet. Because if you do, you're going to unleash all of these toxins your liver cannot handle right now, and it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. I had a colleague of mine in chiropractic school. He was an airline pilot for over 20 years. He got terribly sick with the flu at one point, lost a ton of weight all at once. He lost his long-term and short-term memory. He almost had to quit school, because he was so disoriented because all these toxins from the airline industry just got dumped all at once. So then the third type is the caloric fat weight, and that's what everyone thinks is weight. Oh, it's just calories in, calories out. That is so not the science as we know it now. It's the least common. It's still an effect, but it's not nearly as common as the inflammatory water weight or the toxic hormonal weight.
It's so interesting because
I have so many people who weigh themselves every day.
and everything is
Based on how much they're eating, what they ate the day before, and
I mean, I've been there myself.
Right. Yeah, it can be super frustrating.
I think on that
And I want to move into mood.
and behaviors, mostly because
We're running low on time, and I think it's,
I have to.
you know, sometimes, and I know you're there too, you sometimes have to talk people off the ledge a little bit because they don't understand why things are not going exactly the way they want it to, or why it's their fault that they can't control their cravings, or why it's their fault that all of these things are not going the way that they want when they're trying to do so well. And there are so many factors that play into people's
Behaviors and cravings, and I mean, the list goes on. And so I want to
hear what you're finding in genetics and with your patients as far as the moods and the stress
responses and the behaviors and all of those things.
Sure. So the genetic
contribution to low mood, whether it's anxiety, depression, or otherwise, and I'll frame it as the contribution. The genetic contribution, you can look at someone's genetics and you check a couple specific areas. Number one, we check, and I'm sounding repetitive, you check the inflammatory section. Because if your brain's inflamed, it's kind of hard to be in a good mood.
Right.
Kind of hard. The frontal lobes are the most developed and the most fragile section of the brain. And if they become inflamed, then there's a default back into the limbic or emotional centers. So inflammation will affect it. I believe that's one of the reasons why seasonal affective disorder, SAD, is vitamin D deficiency. I think it's one of the reasons why people are so moody when they're low in vitamin D is because of the
inflammatory mechanism.
of vitamin D are not really there anymore.
Yeah.
The other piece is that you look at someone's dietary routines. So I mentioned one of them before, which was caffeine. Some people have caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. That's genetically based. And this is a very important variable for people to figure out because caffeine is so ubiquitous. Even chocolate. Chocolate's one methyl group away from, theobromine is one methyl group away from caffeine. They're basically identical except for a carbon and 3 hydrogens attached to it. It's a carbon on the surface. I don't know, organic chemistry 25 years ago. So chocolate and caffeine are so ubiquitous, and some people genetically, like me,
Yeah.
get an anxious, depressed mess if I have it. And we just have to be honest about that. Then there's the people who are genetically prone to overeating. It's a satiety gene that fullness is not in the stomach. Fullness is in the brain, genetically mediated from the signal from the stomach. So if people have the gene where they don't feel full on normal amounts of food, then they can get into this self-hatred and I have low willpower and all the rest of it. So the question is okay, well, if you have the gene for low satiety, like I do, how does that not become some nihilistic retreat into, oh, well, I have the genes, might as well pass the Twinkies because blah, blah, blah. No. There's a practical thing you can do, which is control your environment, not your willpower. Again, I'm a fan of reality. I don't buy bread.
Right.
Because I'm not stronger than bread. I'm smarter than bread, but I'm not stronger than it. It wouldn't make it from the grocery store to the car, half of it. The other half would be eaten in the car on the way home. I just don't buy it, so I can't lose.
Right.
And that's how that's one way I control my environment. Same thing with sugar craving. I have the sugar craving gene also.
So do I. Yeah.
And so if I just don't have sugar in the house, I can't lose. And I don't try to fight my willpower.
Yeah. 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 I love that. Which gene is the
Satiety gene.
The
satiety gene is actually a combination. It's like leper gene, the LEPR, and I'll get the exact ones for you. There's a combination of 3 that are the most influential. And okay, here we go. We're looking.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to test you.
No. It's that it's FTO, MC4R, and LEPR1. I don't mind being tested in that sense because there's over 150 or 140 genes, and one of the ways that my report is different is that we're not fixating on specific individual genes in most
cases. We're actually looking at the
clusters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, like, yes, I can name all 16 of the inflammatory genes, interleukin 1, A-1, B, etc., COX genes, etc.
Yeah.
Because I look at those so frequently because their combinations are much more consequential. But what we want to look at with genetics is stop fixating on necessary individual gene, except in a few cases where that matters in a functional state. We want to look at the cluster. So we've got 3 genes that regulate satiety. What is your general picture of those 3 combined?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so then it's like, okay, are you globally a red dot, a yellow dot, or a green dot between the weighted average of those 3 genes? That's why the interpretation is so fast. It's because I'm not spending agonizing my time over every individual gene. I'm looking at them in functional groups, and then taking a weighted average to then practically work on myself or help someone else. Like, look, you have, as a gestalt, you are genetically vulnerable to overeating.
let's work on the
Strategies for that. And as opposed to just like, well, the leopard gene, the member is that, it gets confusing and not helpful.
It's hard. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Super overwhelming. Awesome. Well, we are at time. I could probably spend another 4 hours learning.
Okay.
Talking about this stuff.
Talk again soon.
Well, and we are, which I'm super excited about. We're going to have you on again. Very different topic, though, right? I think in October. I don't know if you remember, but I feel like it's October.
I did that good, right?
Yeah. I think that's right. And so we're going to be diving into spectrum, into, is that correct? Is that what we're...
It's either we're talking about what it's like to be on the spectrum, or we're going to talk about functional labs, like the other 5 types of labs. But it's in our emails. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. I feel like it was more along the spectrum, because I don't think I've had anybody come and talk about that, especially...
Either works.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a full 1-hour special on what it's like to live on the spectrum. And there's a unique in terms of health, but there's some specific health issues that people on the spectrum are more likely to experience. But in general, like I think everyone here who's listening knows someone that either is on the spectrum or they suspect. And the joke, I can't take credit for this joke, I wish I could. Oh, that person hasn't been diagnosed, but they have been peer reviewed.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for that show. I'm excited to have you on again. This has been eye-opening and just really fun to hear. I was like, I really don't even have to say anything. I just have to talk, which is great for me.
It worked out for me. I love the sound of my own voice.
Awesome. Well, how can people find you?
So, drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com is my main practice, and then my genetics, the lay public who want to get their own genetics tests done, go to thednadecoded.com, thednadecoded.com, no dashes or anything, thednadecoded.com. And for any health coaches or practitioners that want to run this type of efficient and effective genes in their practice that will set them apart, for a number of reasons, including this unique carb tolerance test, go to fitgenesusa.com, fitgenesusa.com, fitgenesusa.com. You can sign up to become a practitioner, and then I'm the one who does the trainings. I have a learning library, and can set you up to actually help people using genetics in your practice.
Awesome. I love that. I'm going to do it. I love doing genetic testing, so I'm going to do it hopefully soon.
Order it and do it and become a practitioner. I think that it's a unique and very
usable report for both the patient or client and the practitioner. So look him up on YouTube. Look up his comedy. He's got a bunch of great stuff there. But then learn from him and know that there are a lot of answers out there based on your genetic makeup and not what your nose is doing. It's a lot of good information out there. So anyway, thank you. I appreciate you so much, and let me know if there's anything that I can do for you. If you'll hang on with me just a second while I shut everything down.
Absolutely.
Give me just a couple of seconds. Thanks everybody for being here. Of course, you can find me tastelikenutrition.com. We're here every Thursday, 10 a.m.